Today is the second week of our exploration of Unity's 5 basic principles. So because it's the second week, guess what? We're doing the second principle. Are you surprised? Well, at least I think I'm funny. Okay. The second Unity principle, and of course there's always variations in language, but the general idea is human beings have a spark of divinity within them, the Christ spirit within. The very essence is of God, and therefore they are also inherently good. You remember the first basic unity principle is that there's one presence and one power in the universe, God, the good, omnipotence, omnipresent. So God is everywhere. So there's no other opposite power, even though sometimes we may experience that or feel like we're experiencing that. And so the second principle is reminding us that when we say that God or spirit or whatever word feels right for us for the divine, when we say is everywhere and present in everything, that includes this and y'all and everyone else. There's no, the little saying, there's no spot where God is not. That includes you. And so even though the language that sometimes we say is that human beings have a spark of divinity, and I actually have a little bit of an issue with the spark. I think that it's a good starter place because many people unfortunately came from either a faith tradition or family situations or whatever it may be, where they were told that they were not worthy or not enough, or that they were miserable sinners, or all sorts of not very nice things. And so the spark has its place because it feels like maybe something I could believe in if I've had that experience in the past. But the trouble is it's not a spark because it's all, remember? And so to me, spark means part of, or a little bit, or like a little, it's like a very faint distant star maybe. But really, this spiritual principle is that it's all of us. Now, just like I've said all the time and last week, that doesn't mean that we're all expressing that to the highest at all times. That is not what the principle is saying. It's saying that we are that even if we've forgotten and we put it behind, a dirty window, so we're not seeing it or expressing it. As if you shine light through a dirty window. Anybody had dirty headlights or foggy headlights? It's like that. You can't see very well. It doesn't shine very well. It's not the optimal experience. But that doesn't mean that it's not there. It just means that we're not optimized. And so in Unity, we use the Christ not to mean the last name of a guy named Jesus, but to mean the fully optimization of us human beings walking on earth expressing our divinity. And it doesn't necessarily mean that it has to come from even a Christian perspective. The Buddhists would call it the Buddha nature. And other faith traditions have other words to talk about people living into their fullest divinity potential. So I believe that it's more than a spark, though I think that a spark is a good place to start. It's in all of us. Yes, even them, whoever that might be. And the trouble is that it's not really a trouble, but it seems like it sometimes. Because, as soon as we're born, we start to experience being separate. Because, before we were born, we were getting our needs met. Like, it was all, we were good, things were good. But as soon as we're born, we start to be separate from things. We start to experience being, that there's things that are not us, right? And as we get older, we notice, oh, well, that experience is different, or that person is different in ways that are usually more set dressing than they are the actual essence of who they are. But our culture and our experiences seem to tell us that we're separate. But from the absolute perspective, from the perspective that there's no spot where God is not, from the perspective that there's one presence, from the perspective that we are all the essence of God, then they're not separate. It's all in our heads and the experience that we're having. Sorry, I have like a whole bunch of thoughts. And sometimes when I have a whole lot of thoughts, it's like, which is the next right thought to say out loud? So quote from Charles Fillmore, one of the co-founders of Unity. This is from his book, Atom Smashing Power. He said, God gives us spiritual perfection that we are to manifest and retain eternally in consciousness. And this is from Emily Cady from her book, Lessons in Truth, which is one of the foundational Unity texts. And I just want to note that when these things were written over 100 years ago, the language was a little more he-centric, but just saying. But Emily Cady said, books and lectures are good. Teachers are good. But you must learn for yourself that Christ, the Son of God, and of course she's meaning the offspring or the essence of God, not necessarily a male child, so that the Christ lives in you, and that within you is your light and life and all. And then May Rowland is one of my favorites. She was an early Unity teacher too. She said, Jesus, as the beloved Son of God, came to show you and me what is in every person. So in Unity, we don't see Jesus as the great exception. We see him as the great example, because he did a really good job of expressing his optimal divine self. And you know what's great about it, I think, for the rest of us, is that he still had moments, right? And so I think that helps, I don't know, makes me feel like, okay, well, how about we'll just keep working on having more moments of expressing more of our divinity, more of a cleared headlight, so to speak, and just keep working on that. And I think that it makes me think of several moments, so Peter, the Apostle Peter, represents our power of faith. And one of the things that I think is fun about that is that Peter, if you remember, he did a lot of cha-chaing with who Jesus was. And, he would be like, yes, he'd be totally on board. He walked on water. He'd be like, you are the guy. And then he would be like, wait, what? And he would lose it, right? And he would forget. And I think that it's like, oh yeah, so our faith, sometimes we get it big and then we have a moment, or maybe we go the other way. Mostly we're not getting it. And then we get sparks, flashes. But what's great about that is that when in the stories, when Jesus is with Peter and Peter's doing this thing, I always imagine, this is not, of course, this is, I always imagine Jesus just kind of going, oh, Peter. Sort of like you do when, you see your kid or somebody do something, you're like, oh, that wasn't the best choice. But, you don't decide that they're lost cause. You're just like, yeah. And you behold them with compassion. And I think that is a great thing to remember, is that when we make mistakes and when other people make mistakes, that we can regard them with compassion and just go, yeah, could have done better there. Yeah. Just like Peter, Jesus did with Peter. And but also, part of that holding them with compassion is because we know that they, like us, have all that same divine essence in them, even if they're not expressing it in the way that's the most life-giving or the most helpful, or, if you're a parent, the way that you wish they did. Because they have that. I mean, I would bet, they didn't write it down in the scriptures, but I would bet Mary, mother of Jesus, probably had moments where he was not doing exactly what she thought he should do. I'm just saying. So if we know, or at least I think that for some people, I think for a lot of us, it's hard to fully embrace that idea that we have that very essence of divinity in us. Because, like I said, that's not necessarily what the story of the world around us wants us to believe, right? They want us to buy things to make us look younger or be faster or all of that. There's all this belief that we're different or we need to be separate. And so even if we don't fully get it, and I think that most of us probably don't completely fully get that we are that, but we can at least desire to, or be willing to feel that, be willing to understand it, be willing to be in the presence of that. And so if we know, or at least we know in our heads, we're still working on knowing in our hearts, because like I said, it's a process, that we are the essence of God. And we know that if we are, then all y'all are. That means everybody. And so this is why all the isms, racism, sexism, homophobia, all the isms, they go on and on. I'm not going to list them all. These are spiritual issues. They may have expressions that look like lots of other things, but they are spiritual issues, because at the core, the belief is that this person is separate from me. And not only are they separate from me, but they're not as good as me, or they have some sort of threat to me. And that we could hold the belief that is true is in conflict with the idea that we are the essence of God and that everyone is the essence of God. You see? Now, we regard another with a compassion. We cannot like someone's choices. And if someone's causing harm, we can do what is ours to do to stop them. I am not saying any of those things. We can choose to not spend time with people who don't work for us. We're not meant to be everybody's best friend. And we can just say, that's not my cup of tea. We can say, I get that that person is, having a rough time or experiencing or expressing in ways that are not super healthy. And that means it's just not right for me to be around them. But when we put them in another category, and we put them in the category of bad, we put them in the opposite, the other, the evil, then we are denying their godness. And if we deny their godness, we deny our own. Now, because you're here listening to me, you probably are the kind of people that are working to not do that. Awesome. But we get to continue to do that. Part of being on our spiritual journey and looking to continue to grow is to be willing to notice the places where we've put someone outside the circle. We can put someone outside the circle of our close friends or the people that we want to spend time with, but we can regard them with compassion, even when they've done things that we don't agree with, things that we don't think are, appropriate or right in the world. Like I said, we can have people there's consequences to unjust action, and there should be. But, there's that corner we turn between a line of behavior and actions that are causing harm and we must stop the harm, to deciding that someone is outside, that they're unworthy of compassion, unworthy of love, unworthy of, that they are not part of God. And so part of our journey of being more, cleaning that lens more, being more expressing of our spark. So we know that our spark is not a spark, but all of us, is, like I said, to continue to practice, to do better at knowing that. Jesus, the great example. What did he say at the end? Forgive them, for they do not know what they do. And maybe, you could see that he was saying, Father, forgive them, asking, but maybe he was saying in his own heart, reminding himself, they don't know what they do, and I hold no grudge. That's some pretty big stuff. I wouldn't mind being more like that. How about you? Yeah. We can still be clear and make actions and make boundaries and not hold a grudge. We can forgive and let ourselves free of the chain. We cannot spend time thinking about how so-and-so is a you-know-what. Because who is that helpful for? It's not helpful for so-and-so. They don't know that you think they're a you-know-what. So you're spending time believing and holding that is essence, that someone is outside the circle, that someone is not the essence of God. That's not helpful. So our practice as spiritual journeyers, as the essence of God, is to practice knowing who we are. And then to practice knowing who all y'all are. And then realizing that there's no difference between me and all y'all. I know, I've never lived in the South, but I do like that saying every now and then, all y'all. And so you want a practical tool. Here's a tool, okay? Okay, so here we go. You take a few breaths. And just start. You bring to mind someone who you can see the most good and expression of joy and love and light. Sometimes I know many grandparents see their grandchildren that way. Maybe it's a beloved pet. There's expressions of the divine too. Maybe it's a spiritual teacher. And we just take a moment to regard and know in our bones how they are an expression of the divine. And we see, even if they have hiccups, we see it with compassion. Holding that same space of positive regard, of knowing that truth. We slide into that space. You can start with someone who just irritates you. You don't have to go all the way. Can you use that same positive regard, compassion for your dear one, as for that person who annoys you? Grounding back to that knowledge of the divinity of that one who you hold in high regard. Maybe you can slide yourself into that spot. Knowing with compassion for the mistakes, knowing they are an expression of love and joy. then you can breathe. So this is a deceptively simple practice. You can practice it. It probably, I'm going to guess it was easier to hold that space for the first person, and it might have gotten complicated for the person who annoys you and or for yourself. That's the trouble with holding these space for ourselves sometimes, because we know all the stuff that goes on in our head and we sometimes can be quite judgy. But what would Jesus say? He'd be like, oh, it's all right. I think that's what Jesus would say, and any spiritual teacher. I imagine the Dalai Lama would say, it's all right. Just take a breath, get back on track. And so if we practice this practice, and, if you're feeling good about it, you can start sliding in maybe some of those other people. Maybe if you read the news, there might be other people who you might have some feelings about, try it on them too. And one more tool before we end. I was sharing with a friend of mine about someone who lives nearby that I don't know them. I don't know their name. I just have the experience of knowing that something is not right in their world, and they definitely are struggling and making some choices that affect their neighbors and themselves in not very helpful ways. And my friend said, you don't have to know their name. You could just call them something like God's beloved. And I was like, yeah, that's exactly right. Because I don't want to make this person an enemy in my mind or in my heart. I have compassion for this person, that they obviously have things going on and they need something that they're not getting, some kind of support. But if I can hold in my heart that, whether it's Christ child or beloved or of God or whatever word works for you to remind you of who they really are, then we cannot put them outside. We can still have, like I said, boundaries. We can still call an account for consequences if necessary. But they don't become the enemy, the opposite, the other. And that is really powerful. And that is doing our spiritual work right in the realness of life. So this whole thing about us having the divinity within us, it's a really important thing. It's a really important thing to remember that we have it, that everyone has it. We all have the ability to create and manifest and show up. And we do it the best as we continue to clean our own windows that we're shining through. So that we can see that we all are the same light. So hopefully you'll practice some of those cool tools this week. And maybe you'll even report back on one of our social media places about something you noticed. That would be cool.